Welcome back. Now I'm gonna give the floor over to our own Santtu, who will be hosting a panel on the topic of the evolution of hybrid RTLS. Over to you, Santtu.
Thank you, Thomas. Enough of coffee, back to the business. So the topic of our next panel is hybrid RTLS. And what really makes this panel so exciting is our wonderful group of panelists, which I dare to say that in total we have more than 50 years of RTLS experience in total here, and we really represent a variety of RTLS technologies. But RTLS, for those who don't know, I bet many know it, but it refers to real-time locating systems. The term itself was coined from the reliable source from Wikipedia. I read that it's coined somewhere a little bit before 2000. And back in the days, the technologies in play were RFID and infrared. And allegedly the first commercial deployments took place in the 90s in the healthcare domain, which still much seems to get a lot of love from technology providers and solution providers as well. And we also may call it a little bit of a red ocean because there is a lot of crowd in that space. However, today, under the umbrella of RTLS, there are a variety of technologies and techniques that essentially are making sense of what is there. At Quuppa, we have observed that now the market is no longer interested in only like a point solution, so one RTLS technology to solve one problem in one silo, but rather a variety of technologies that solve multiple problems and then hence providing visibility to multiple processes in, out, and between the facilities. In manufacturing, this could be supply chain visibility of components, and in healthcare, for example, blood sample transportation from the hospital to lab and back. But enough of my rambling, so now it's time to pick the brains of our panelists. So without further ado, let panelists to introduce themselves. So this would be roughly a max 2 minutes about the introduction of you, your company, your role in the company, and perhaps some highlight of your RTLS history. And let's start in the alphabetical order. So Andy, why don't you take the first run on this?
Thanks, Santtu. So yeah, my name's Andy Ward. I've been working in the RTLS business, if you will, since I was at university 30 years ago. I did my PhD in sensor-driven computing using location data to drive computer systems, and I'm currently CTO at Ubisense, which is a company that sells RTLS technology and solutions to industrial customers primarily, but we also have customers in transit, military, entertainment, and so on. And we build those systems using our own ultra-wideband tracking technology, but we also use great sensors from third-party suppliers like Quuppa, who we're proud to be partners with, to help gather information for those solutions, and then we take that information into a location platform that we sell called SmartSpace to deliver, end-to-end solutions for our customers. And about 5% of the world's cars are now built using Ubisense solutions. So that's a kind of potted history of my activities in RTLS.
Thank you, Andy. And we are just trying to guess here what is the manufacturer then, but let's go to Richard. How about you go then?
Hi, I'm Rich Lansdowne. I'm currently Senior Director of Business Development within the LoRa business of Semtech. Yeah, like Andy, I was kicking around in university in Southampton about 30 years ago. Got a master's in information engineering. I started life working in radio and wireless in the cellular industry before becoming a system on chip development specialist with Nokia mobile phones back in the day when that was the bleeding edge. So I've been with Semtech almost 25 years now, and prior to joining the LoRa team, I used to run our precision synchronization business. I joined the LoRa team in 2015, right after the LoRa Alliance has been founded. And over the next couple of years or so, people started referring to me as the geolocation guy after I managed to get myself involved in so many aspects of bringing geolocation to LoRaWAN as a technology. So I guess more recently, as we developed a silicon to cloud concept where we embed features inside the silicon that link, get controlled, managed by the cloud, I ended up having to build out the cloud services team that now take care of what is LoRa Cloud, and they're up and running. I believe deeply in taking a design thinking approach to create these kind of novel solutions for real life applications, and for sure I think hybrid RTLS is really one of those things that really benefits from that. So right now I guess I've transitioned into the business development team, focusing on bringing ecosystem players together, addressing some kind of points of friction in delivery of their IoT solutions. Part of my role is working with strategic relationships like we have with SAS, and adding LoRaWAN based sensing to their world leading sort of data analytics IoT solutions. And I have to say, I'm really looking forward to this panel with Andy and Steve, and like to really thank Quuppa for the opportunity to talk with such interesting guys on a topic that's absolutely is close to my heart. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Richard. Steve.
I feel like a relative newcomer to this space in the presence of Andy and Rich. I first started working with Bluetooth tags and beacons almost 10 years ago when I was at Qualcomm. We developed one of the first commercial Bluetooth beacon solutions, which ended up supporting iBeacon, and we deployed our product at all of the Apple stores and the Super Bowl and banks and so forth. And when I left to start my own company, I bootstrapped it by consulting with companies that were interested in RTLS. One of them, actually, we ended up deploying a Quuppa solution, which was later featured when the Bluetooth SIG started pushing their instantiation of angle of arrival in the Bluetooth stack. So anyway, I wrote a book called Beacon Technologies, distinguished by probably being one of the longest books on Bluetooth beacons and tags. Started a podcast called Mr. Beacon 5 years ago. Have over 100 episodes, many of them featuring Quuppa. And now I am head of marketing at a company called Wiliot. We are a sensing as a service company that's also a semiconductor designer, and we've developed a tag that looks like this. It's basically very low cost Bluetooth tag. It's actually a computer, 3 cores, ARM processor, RAM, ROM, and I'm super excited to be working in this ecosystem and seeing it go to the next level as RTLS becomes a ubiquitous part of many different businesses.
Thank you, Steve. And my name is Santtu Puli. I'm basically the tag guy at Quuppa. And now that I computed the numbers together, we have about 80 years of total experience here. So I was a little bit shy on my estimate, but let's see what we make out of that. So as in any panel, we have some questions drafted to guide the discussion, but feel free when you have some juicy sidetrack to take the topic. Feel free to venture there, and so I have at least some job to do to tame the discussion and bring ourselves in the track. We have roughly, I would say, 30 minutes to cover the topic. Let's see where we end up. Are you guys ready?
Let's go.
All righty. So the first one would be, where are we now with the maturity of RTLS technologies? It's a little bit wide question, but who wants to go first? What's the status of the maturity of RTLS technologies?
I'm happy to pitch in. I think it's a very exciting time. I think all of us have been at the bleeding edge of this, and I really feel like we have a robust toolbox with solutions that can deliver against different dimensions of cost, accuracy, interoperability. I think the role of angle of arrival, Bluetooth angle of arrival, is an important one. We're now at a point where multiple vendors are jumping on that. It's no longer an exotic thing. It's affordable. It's accurate. It has its limitations, and when those limitations hit, you have some exciting options with ultra wideband, and we're starting to see the Wi-Fi access point vendors with less accurate solutions, but solutions that are becoming more and more accessible and available at very low cost. And I think we're also starting to see business drivers that are driving more broader adoption of these technologies. So that's my starter.
I think we might just perhaps be at the end of the beginning. Right. I mean, we're not at the end, but we might be at the end of the beginning. And I think that what it kind of reminds me of is the first time I saw a mobile phone was when my uncle, who's a kind of rural doctor, showed up with a kind of cellular phone in his car. And it was kind of functional, and it was a huge, great big brick, but it did what he needed. And I kind of think that that's where we're at with RTLS. That, you know, if you need RTLS, then there are technologies out there that are perfectly serviceable, but we're miles off, you know, it being ubiquitous. So if you kind of think the mobile phones took in the late 90s before that happened, and you know, the kind of the promise, I think, you know, end promise of RTLS, you know, the capabilities that we will be able to achieve with it are a bit like kind of, you know, being in the mid 80s and then looking towards mobile internet on your mobile phone, right? There's a long way to go yet, but I think we're at the point, as Steve says, where there are perfectly functional kind of technologies that you know will solve certain problems with certain limitations.
And
for sure,
Richard,
you know, this, you know, we've had RTLS around for decades, but it's really been much more tethered than we're going to expect to see. You know, it's going to become, let's say, untethered. It's going to, you know, drop into, as Steve showed there, you know, the little tags, things that are built with a, you know, lifetime battery that don't have to be recharged because they come with everything they need for their entire existence. And because everyone's thinking RTLS, self-driving vehicles, drones, all of those things, but that's one driver, one major driver. But you know, I think we'll talk some more about it perhaps. But moving into, I just want to know where things are. I just want to know where all of my stuff is. And then there's a big data context, which I don't think we've even really touched on, which is if I have lots more little pieces of information that are location aware, you get a much better picture. The more you can geotag information, the more rich it can become.
we were talking about
just to pitch in here, I think one of the factors, and it's easy to forget it, is that where the consumer is with RTLS. The fact that Apple is now marketing these beautiful tags that kind of essentially do what Tile did, but with a mixture of Bluetooth and ultra wideband. I think as vendors in this space, you need drivers at the very top of organizations through to the specialists line of business managers to ask the question, you know, why can't I find this stuff? If I can find everything else in my home, why can't I find this? So, and they can see that the technology is good. You can have your phone and you can literally point to where an asset is. And so I think that is going to be raising the need and raising the level of education and spurring on us vendors to do better and better to match the bar that's being set in the consumer space.
Now that we were talking about drivers, but do you see something that would really hold us back, like RTLS becoming more of a mainstream? Is it the information silos, or is it the cost of it, or what would you identify as some sort of a blockers to RTLS become mainstream? You're on mute, by the way.
I still think
Let me unmute. In a word, power consumption. Okay, that's 2 words, and maybe 3 words: power consumption and coverage. I think those are major obstacles that hold things back, because, you know, as we were talking about just a minute ago, giving something the energy it needs, leaves the factory with the energy it needs for its entire existence, is incredibly challenging at the right kind of cost points. So, you know, and in order to address that, one needs to often think differently. You know, if we keep iterating, we make those incremental changes. And, you know, if you look at our latest device with GPS offloading, you know, we think differently and say, okay, does the device actually need to know where it is, or do you need to know where the device is? So our LR1110 just gets to the pseudo ranges of the satellites. You uplink that, you fix in the cloud, and you then get a fix for somewhere between 2 and 10% of the power consumption of getting a full fix with a GPS device. So it's about that thinking differently to get those step changes that I think that we're going to need. And then coverage. I think coverage really comes down to, you know, where do you actually need this thing to work? And many times people overthink it, because they actually only need to know inventory management. Have I got these things on this site or this site? And that's very simple. So I think that's a really big issue.
I was going to say installation cost. I mean, I was guessing that I was coming at it from a more indoor kind of perspective. Certainly, pretty much every RTLS that uses the information on the system side. I mean, I think Steve made a good point that there are some very interesting consumer applications like AirTags out there, where it's the phone that's doing the locating. But you know, in general, when we think of RTLS, or certainly for industrial applications, and I believe in the future for some consumer applications as well, you'll be looking at locating these tags or devices within some infrastructure, and that really requires, you know, deployment of items around the environment, and those items tend to have power connected to them, because they're some long-lived item that's doing a lot of sensing, perhaps like the Quuppa locators. And you know, one way or another, those things have to have a wire to them, and that's a big burden in terms of industrial kind of RTLS. But I think there are some kind of ways in which that's changing. People are looking now, with the advent of 5G and Wi-Fi 6E, at doing the networking side of infrastructure wirelessly. You know, those networks are reliable enough and have high enough bandwidth and so on to support those applications, you know, in a completely robust way, and powering those things just using whatever DC or AC bus power is around the factory. Now, that's probably a cheaper way of installing than the way that people do at the minute, which is using technologies like Power over Ethernet and so on. So I think there's some hope there that you know, these infrastructure heavy systems will, you know, for indoors at least, will become a bit more flexible. And as more and more devices are put out there, I think we might see a bit of a return to the kind of mesh networking ideas that people have always kind of espoused in these areas. But you have to have a certain density of you know, mesh components in your environment for that to really work, which is why I think so far those haven't really taken off.
Steve, already you mentioned already the kind of the access point based solution, for example, that the infrastructure that was originally meant for the communication and data is now being used for the RTLS purposes. But what other kind of drivers could we identify for the adoption of these technologies? That would be the battery was identified as the one, or the lifetime, so that the device is able to cope with the whole the lifetime of the solution, what it requires. But what other sort of future drivers we could identify here?
I think it's it's a lot of it is about kind of accepted norms of what people expect, and the ROI being proven. And I think using the Geoffrey Moore crossing the chasm piece, I think I believe we're still in the chasm, but I think we're about to cross it. And what's really required is some gorillas to offer this technology. So I believe that there'll be consolidation, there'll be acquisitions that will make the decision-making process easier. At the moment, you still need experts, people like us, and we should really be irrelevant because there should be major companies, and there are major companies that are investing in this technology just to do what they do. If you think, I mean, I remember when the first packaged accounting systems were implemented, and there were questions about, you know, did it really make sense, and which one do you choose? And then basically Oracle Financials, SAP, they rolled out. No one asks what's the ROI for having an accounting system now. It's just accepted that you need it. And so the idea of walking around and hiring people to find lost stuff in a manufacturing environment, the idea of having products in a store which can't be found. So if I look at retail as an example, one of the things that COVID has done is it's taught us that fulfillment is easy if you're at home, and it's actually a lot simpler and viable to shop from home. So retailers are going to have to compete on experience, and having an experience where you don't know what's in stock or where it is just completely unacceptable. So I believe from a manufacturing perspective, from a retail perspective, that there needs to be a new norm, and I think that's about to occur, you know, very soon. And I think in the supply chain as well, COVID has taught us that that supply chains are super important. Again, we need to know where stuff is in that supply chain. And so that's driving a lot of infrastructure investment. More and more containers and trucks are being wired. It used to be so that they didn't get lost. You know, where is that truck driver? Now it's, you know, what's in the truck? What's the temperature of it? And so all of this is starting to be joined up. And the companies that adopt this technology are going to be the winners and the survivors, and the ones that don't will lose, and they'll disappear, and it'll be a Darwinistic thing. I think the people responsible for supply chains, for manufacturing, for merchandising will, over the next year or two, gathering at their conferences, will just accept that, oh, you've got to do this. And so the question is, where are you going to get it from? And I think more and more of the larger companies are starting to take a position that will drive adoption of this, because it's part of their price sheet.
Can I just pick up on something Andy mentioned there about you know, the reliance on deploying infrastructure for your application? And of course, there's many things where, for example, you know, our smartphone doesn't rely on the fact that we've deployed infrastructure to find it. It basically opens up every radio it has inside, throws everything it receives at a computational engine inside Apple or Google, and based on, you know, cell IDs, Wi-Fi access points, Bluetooth beacons, IP address lookup, everything, we tried to guess where that phone is, and to a large extent it's pretty good. However, there's a big issue there with using, let's say, shared or public infrastructure, that's because spoofing and proof of location, even GPS, is widely spoofed and, you know, blocked and interfered with. So for me, one of the things that's holding back, particularly,
I think, Richard, you got off for a second. Are you still there? Okay. Well, let's hope he will be back in a second. But one thing I think we have been all talking Sorry, Richard, we
become
lost you
something
for
that,
about 20 seconds.
Oh, sorry.
No
So
worries.
I think using, have I come back? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, there.
So I think using multiple technologies to run some kind of proof of location is going to become more and more important as we move through becoming reliant on these technologies.
Very well, very well. Hey, and I have heard many times now us discussing about supply chain, and it's natural because not only we have some container ship being jammed in the Suez Canal, but we also have heard about the vaccines, like COVID vaccines, to be been necessary to have them in the cold temperature and monitor that. But if you think about from the perspective of what we call in the technology domain end customer, someone, for example, who is working with the supply chain, how would you advise this kind of a person to choose the RTLS technology for their needs? How would you approach this from practical perspective?
I think there's a number of dimensions that they can look at, and obviously it needs to be driven by business requirements. It's not about getting the cheapest, the most accurate. Your choices need to be driven by a business case and deciding what that business case is, and ideally having adjacent business cases in mind, because this really is a platform at its best. You're not selecting a technology for one use case, because there's so many things that you can use an RTLS for. If you just design it for one, you're missing out. But you do need that lead pin in order to drive the justification. And so I think you do need to look at all the typical dimensions, which is, how accurate does this locationing need to be? How frequently does it need to be done? What is the infrastructure that is available? Do I have the opportunity to upgrade it? And you have to look at things like battery life and the form factor of the tags that are going to be tracked. So those are some of the dimensions that I think need to be considered. And of course, cost. There's some incredible solutions that are very expensive. There's a great set of solutions where you can spend a modest amount and get amazing results.
I guess from my perspective, I would always advise clients to be realistic about what accuracy and performance they need. I've come across too many instances where, we've been rescuing a situation where essentially an underperforming but perhaps cheap solution has been put in too early, and there's really nothing you can do to make those things work if they're not delivering the accuracy that you need for your application. And that accuracy level will be different. There'll be some things where, straight BLE at 5 to 10 meters is perfectly adequate, but there'll be other things where you need a bit more, and there'll be things where you need millimeter accurate, and you can't go cheap and then expect software or something like that to magic up extra accuracy to make your application work. So I think that that would be my kind of initial take on it. But at the same time, you can't go, turn the accuracy dial all the way up if it's beyond your budget. So again, people have to be realistic about what they need and what they can afford.
I think there's often people think about RTLS and they only think about track and trace. They only think about asset tracking, but there's an awful lot more that's in the sort of cradle to grave thing. Like, where is my device as soon as it's left the factory? Just for example, just take a shipment of cars crossing over from Asia into Europe. They have to stop at some point. They have to bake the inside of the ship to kill any bugs and things. And you need some kind of report that says this happened to this vehicle. And so having that said, this happened to me and I was on this ship, and then you have to link that to the ship's location, and you have to start pulling all these things together. And so even before that is owned by someone, tracking that item. Where is my water meter installed? The guy is installing 10 water meters. He beeps the barcode on there. We just do a one-time location event to check that it makes sense. That proof of location thing, again, which says that's the right one, gone on the right property, and bam, it goes alive. So there's a lot more than just tracking widgets and going and finding them and getting them back. There's a lot in that. How do I optimize my supply chain? Because once someone's bought it, they've screwed it to the wall or whatever, they don't care anymore. But we did care before someone bought it, or maybe we cared after they bought it. How did something become recycled? Did it make its way to the right place at the end of its life? So there's a lot of those kind of ends that don't really get thought of when you first think about locations.
I'd echo that. I mean, I think that there's three real classes of RTLS application that we see. We see kind of visibility, which is where's my stuff. We see analytics, which is where you take data over a long period of time and use it to work out trends or process deviations and so on. And then the toughest is kind of control applications, where essentially you're using the RTLS as a sensor system that provides some sort of real-time visibility to computer systems that then make their own decisions about what should happen in an environment, like a factory, in terms of controlling processes and changing the way the factory works. And as you go up that kind of, visibility, analytics, control kind of ladder, the requirements for accuracy and the level of performance and reliability that you need increase. Because at the visibility level, at the lowest level, you've got a person in the loop who can tell whether the thing looks sensible, whether it looks a bit crazy, or can interpolate between the points. But by the time you get to the control applications, you really have to be using sensing systems and technology that really gives you the right answer every time, because the computer system isn't going to have that same level of does that really look right that a person would have if they were in the loop.
I think there's a lot to be said for Andy's position. I'm going to take a different position, and often in these panels, everyone always agrees, and so I'm going to maybe being deliberately contrarian. I see a counter phenomenon here, which is particularly in retail. You have a lot of new people coming, and they get asked the question, how accurate does this need to be? So imagine you're in their position and you say, well, it needs to be completely accurate. I want 100%, maybe 99.99% is acceptable, because we have to know where everything is. And then you ask, well, how accurate is your inventory system at the moment? And the answer is, it's kind of like 60%. And you're like, okay, so you can spend millions of dollars on something that can get you 100% accuracy. And this will completely kill the project. And you can spend actually very little and get 90% accuracy. And you suddenly had a massive increase, a transformational level of precision that can allow you to cut the amount of inventory that you have by 10%, cut your capital employed by inventory by 10%. You can delight your customers by finding where these things are. So I'm not seriously debating Andy on his on what he said, but I think
we're violently agreeing there, Stephen. That's just what I was saying before about being realistic about what level of accuracy you need, right? I think it's exactly your point. It's crazy to say, well, okay, it's going to be 100% right every time in that application. But for example, if what you're using is a tool that screws in the airbag in a car and that's being controlled by your location system, well, you better have that dial turned way up, probably even better than a person would do it if they were in the loop, because in the end, somebody's going to come back and say, how come you only put something in that was 99.999% reliable? So I think we're kind of violently agreeing, but it's a really good point. People do tend to, either over specify these things or under specify these things. You've really got to hit the right spot where the budget and the accuracy and the performance all meet. So.
And the important thing there is often when, that a device needs accuracy for a very small proportion of its time, but the rest of the time you just need to know if it moved or not, or those kinds of things. But I am going to disagree with Stephen. 10% way too low. It's closer to 30% in everything I've ever come across.
But I think this takes takes me back to the university and economics 101, that there is still in this RTLS business this like decrease in marginal utility of accuracy, so that eventually we go to the when the next step of accuracy becomes so expensive that it really kills the use case. But if you're able to find this kind of equilibria, and so that it serves still the purpose of why do you get the RTL system in the first place, that's, I guess, your best thing to do to start with, at least.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think one of the challenges, particularly because RTLS is a new field, is knowing what's the thing that's just going to come along where I need that bit more, or where the thing that I'm going to put in at a certain price point is not quite enough to do the thing for tomorrow. Because again, that's only something that really the market will illuminate when it's a bit more mature and people really understand what value RTLS can bring to them and so on. Right? Essentially, there's that looking at that curve and seeing exactly where you want to sit and exactly what investment you want to make. You really have to have a good view of what RTLS can do for you today and what it might be able to do for you in the very near future as well. From an application point of view, not a technology.
And so I'm going to pick up on that right there, Andy, because we started a few years ago to try to define what was holding things back. And we decided to put the world into two camps. There were what we called technologists, and there were the people who innovate around the application, the applicationist. So the technologists understand maths and physics and how all the equations make sense and how an angular arrival can be put into a location, and they know the limitations. And as Stephen said a minute ago, when you design a technology, you better make it adaptable to multiple applications, otherwise you're selling yourself short. For me, the technologists just know everything about that technology, and the application innovators don't have to understand the technology. I think they just need to say, tell me the constraints, the box I need to live in, and I can say whether that's for me valuable or not. So if I'm trying to design, just to take a stupid example, a dog collar, right? Then my dog spends 95% of its time in the home. I just need to know if it's home or not. And so if it fires up a GPS every 15 minutes, it's a complete waste of power. So I just need to know, is it home or not? So when I understand the actual application, that is very different to something to track my briefcase or my bicycle. They're very different applications. So when we get these two worlds, somehow we have to bridge them, because the technologists love their technology and they just love saying, look at this, how I can put these things there and I can make magic happen. And then the application guys come and say, I could kill this with that. And they just need to really bring together and make this kind of recipe of the different things. I think it's what Stephen was saying, maybe.
Were you?
Yeah, I think so. And I think we're in this stage where we still need technologists. I think we'll know we've truly crossed the chasm when all this stuff becomes so commoditized. It's just built into the infrastructure and the systems. But at the moment, we still need those technologists who have an incredible insight into the business side of things. And I was thinking back to a project that I was working on where there was a really good head of technology who saw the business problems, because he was kind of responsible for some of them. He did this amazing thing. He actually, it was a Quuppa project, and we deployed the technology, and he put these tags on these automated delivery vehicles that were whizzing around developing stuff, delivering pallets from one part of the factory to another. And he recognized that he'd sold this to the CFO with a great ROI. I'm not sure how real it was, but it stood up to prodding and poking by a finance guy. But the thing that really sold this project to the leaders of this company was a dashboard where these dots were moving around in real time, a little bit like the Quuppa tags on the ice hockey players. And those business people, the ROI was completely forgotten. That when they could see this happening in real time, they were like, this is the future. This is how we're going to compete. There's no question that we should do this. So sometimes it's not the technology, it's kind of this passionate response that where people can see this vision of how things are going to change, how every tool, work in progress item, finished product, raw material is going to be tracked, and how that's going to drive who are the winners and the losers in their industry.
All right. I think we're soon turning to the latter part of the panel, so a couple minutes left for the questions. But is anyone feeling bold enough to give some future predictions of RTLS? So where are we heading, and who will be these winners, and what should we bet on? Which technologies? Which I actually love the Richard was saying about design thinking, so starting the process from that perspective. But take the mic. It's your turn.
So I guess I've spent all of my career in real deep technology companies, and one thing that being involved in LoRa has really taught me is that you can think of 20 applications for a particular sensor, and then you'll meet another guy who said, oh, I'm using that for this, and microphones to hear termites attacking houses, all kinds of sensors for palm oil trees, all kinds of things where the cow's eating a bolus and this thing is sitting inside them, taking their temperature and their pulse. So one thing is for sure, I don't believe the technologists understand the industry, and I don't believe the technologists understand the applications, but sure, we absolutely need them because they provide the ingredients for the recipes that make the real solution. And the design thinking approach is to start with the problem and say, what ingredients can I take? And I think there's not going to be technology winners. I don't back one horse in this camp, because just imagine someone says to you, you can do this all on Wi-Fi. Why do you don't need Bluetooth anymore? So hang on a minute, they all do different jobs, and they are all better and worse at different jobs. So I don't believe the who's going to win. There is no one winner. The winners are going to be those people that make the right recipe, the right mix, and optimize to completely to take out the cost and the power and make it a whole solution that lives in the real world.
Yeah, I don't think this. I think again, it's probably one of these areas where we're all completely agreed, which is that there's no best sensor. There's just the best sensor for the job. But I will stick my neck out and highlight a couple of technologies which I think have got real potential for opening up areas that were previously difficult in terms of RTLS. So the first is RTK GPS. Basically, for those of you who don't know, it's a kind of multi-frequency differential GPS technology, which is just, it's been around in surveying for several years. It's used in things like high-end agriculture and so on, and it's now getting to the point where it's kind of consumer grade, and that really is amazing stuff. So for outdoor tracking of things where you've got decent sky visibility and some power, it really is phenomenally accurate, probably about 2 or 3 centimeters in 3D, and it really works. It's a fantastic technology. And then the other thing I think that's kind of interesting coming along, which I kind of seen a paper from about 1984 by a guy called Gary Bishop, which described this in 1984, and he described a kind of little cube that had cameras pointing in every direction and an inertial measurement unit, and it was called the optical self-tracker. And when I was studying location systems at university in the mid-90s. That kind of like, oh man, that guy was ahead of his time. Well, now you can kind of buy these things. Technology has got to the point where optical self-tracking using SLAM and so on, you know, that sounds like a really, I think that's a really interesting technology, and companies like Slamcore and so on are taking that now and embedding it in vehicles and so on. And I think that's another really interesting data feed that doesn't rely on those kind of infrastructure deployments and so on. So again, it needs power, and they have to work on that, I'm sure. But those technologies, I think, are going to be really interesting additional data feeds for those kind of, you know, challenging applications where you need centimeter level outdoors or positioning in building without great deals of infrastructure.
Loving it, loving it. Hey, then the bonus question to Steve. So when everything is expected to be free of charge in today's world, who is paying the lunches for everyone?
I think it's the brands, it's the companies that make things. They have so much to gain by basically turning the Internet of Things into the Internet of everyday things. At the moment, tracking and RTLS is focused on expensive things, and this is self-serving. It's kind of what we're working on at Wiliot with, kind of this self-powered stuff. But I think there's going to be a bunch of companies that compete with us that latch onto this. And I think it's the brands who up until now have not had visibility of their products after they leave the factory, and they will know where they are in stores. They'll start to understand when consumers are interacting with them in the store, in the home, and I see a future where everything is tracked, whether it's people, tools, products, and that tracking will continue into the home. We're starting to get smarter homes with infrastructure that can provide the connectivity. And you know, the days of losing your passport or losing your socks, having the odd sock syndrome, that will end. And so who benefits from that? It's the brands that make things, and they're all going to be trying to be the Netflix of grocery, the Netflix of clothing. There'll be a future, a circular economy future, where because products are tracked, because they're aware, we'll invest more in them. They'll be better quality, they'll last longer, and they won't just have one owner. That's my kind of hopeful vision of the future. And I think if you can be the Netflix of grocery or the Netflix of clothing, streaming products in, understanding how they're being used, your valuation goes up. You know, we only need to look at the valuation of Tesla versus conventional car companies. So I think there's real incentives for the CXOs to invest in that future, and I think they'll be rewarded. And I'm really hopeful that consumers will latch on to the idea of having quality products that last longer, rather than this disposable economy that we're living in at the moment.
Thank you, Steve. I think that's a good moment to stop. Unfortunately, our time is up. I wish I could continue this discussion further, because perhaps we have to do another session another time and record them and have them available online. But just to sum it up, I think there is, again, no silver bullet, but there are a lot of good bullets to use, and there will be smart technologists and the solution providers and consultants who will put these ingredients together to combine, enrich the data with location and information, possibly to save money with it, or even save lives with that. Isn't that what we all are after? And I think it's great job what you guys are doing and what we are doing and what we're doing together. I think it will be great future ahead. Once again, huge thanks for the panelists. You were fantastic, and thank you for the audience. Back to you, Thomas. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Thank you, Santtu. Thank you, panelists. Let's have a short break before we go to the last program of the event, which is a panel discussion on multi-technology and partner ecosystem. See you in a bit.